Hello everyone. Welcome to today's session. Just a quick reminder, as a couple of you are joining, if you wouldn't mind going on to mute, just for the introduction. At least we will have plenty of time for discussion in a bit. But hello everyone, welcome. If we haven't met before as part of this programme, my name is Luke Bevere. I'm a senior consultant at Mutual Ventures and part of the team working with the Department for Education and local family justice systems across England as part of the National Trailblazer programme and the National Learning Support programme. But we'll kind of do a little bit more about that in a second, but today's session is also run in partnership with John Foster from Data to Insight, who are partners together on the programme. Thank you everyone for joining. I know for many of you, you will have been at our session a couple of weeks ago where we looked at learning from Trailblazers in a bit more detail. Today's session will be focused on the kind of upcoming and current FFP reforms and implications that will have for data collection and managing performance. A little bit more about us at Mutual Ventures if this is your first time engaging with us, but we are a specialist public sector consultancy. We've got a particular specialism in children's social care. So we've worked with the Department for Education in particular over the last few years, where we've been their main delivery partner for several national programmes, including the Family First for Children partnership programme, as well as the DFJ Trailblazers programme, which this session is a part of. John, over to you.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here today. Thank you all for coming, and also thanks to Mutual Ventures for hosting. As Luke said, we've been working on this Trailblazers project for over a year now, and our focus has really been on supporting the data and performance part of that. So I'm from Data to Insight, which is a small organisation that's hosted by East Sussex County Council, and we work across the sector to help local authorities make better use of their data, making free data tools, web tools, Python code libraries, as well as a few data collections that we operate, and also helping more and more on kind of wider data strategies and things like that. Next slide, I think. Yeah, that's me again. Okay, great. So the first thing we're going to do is just think about the aims of the session. So the first thing we'll be doing is having a little recap of workshop 1. I know many of you were here, so we'll keep that really brief, but just a very quick overview about why we're looking at court delays. Then we're going to be understanding pre-proceedings through that lens of Families First partnership programme, and then specifically we'll be looking at the new SIN census requirements as a basis for reporting on pre-proceedings. And then lastly, we'll be having a discussion. So I think there's going to be 3 breakout rooms, and then we'll be talking about how prepared you are for the SIN census changes. Of course, that's a kind of quite a broad guideline, so we'll be there to facilitate as well.
Thank you, John.
I think it's back to you, Luke, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you. So, so today's session is the second of two out of 2 data deep dive sessions, and this is part of the DFJ Trailblazer programme, and this has been going on for a couple of years. So initially the department provided funding to 5 local family justice systems, or DFJ areas, and they were looking at introducing solutions to address their local drivers of delay within care proceedings, and this looked in particular at the 5 themes that are there on the slide. So aligning system governance, improving data availability and use, creating vehicles and incentives for multi-agency collaboration, improving pre-proceeding practice and divert cases from courts, and helping children and families navigate the system. Kind of John will be going into this in a little bit more detail around kind of what the delays are and why that's important. But in terms of kind of where we've got to with the programme, so there was an initial period of the pilot where we worked with the 5 areas, and this was really focused on kind of developing kind of deep baseline analysis to understand their local areas, understand what their local context that they're working in and what their specific local drivers of delay within care proceedings were. We then worked with them to co-design potential solutions and develop an implementation plan. And the learning from this kind of initial work with the Trailblazers, which took place over the course of about a year and a half, has then been scaled through the guided learning program where we've kind of worked initially with a cohort of 15 other DFJ areas and subsequently now working with the rest of the country. And this is kind of providing the learning and sharing the learning from the process that the Trailblazers went through with the rest of the country to also address kind of local challenges and local drives of delay. So that's a kind of a bit of a quick background to that. So John, I'm going to be handing back to you for the kind of the main presentation.
Perfect, thank you. So the first thing I wanted to do really, as I know we have a lot of local authority data people on the call, which is obviously Data to Insight's kind of main community really, is just take a slightly wider view and look at the family justice system. And I think what I want to talk about here is you can see from this diagram, which we put together, how complex it is. You have a huge amount of stakeholders operating within this process, both at a delivery level where you've got local authorities, LFJBs, and within that social workers, legal representatives, courts, judges, and then also at a governance level as well. So obviously you've got the Department for Education that manages the activity of local authorities, but you have a whole raft of other government bodies or related bodies that are responsible for different parts of the process. I think it's really important for us as LA analysts who tend to just see our kind of little bit of the world to understand that actually this is a huge system. It's a complex system with many stakeholders. However, what I would say though is while we're just part of the wider processes, the data that we collect and really the way that we work with children and families makes us a really key player, a really important part of that system. And that's why I think you'll see from the activities that Mutual Ventures have been done that there is such a focus on pre-proceedings as part of this process. Can we move to the next slide, please? So why is there such a focus on delays? Well, there's a statutory timescale for public law cases, which you are undoubtedly aware of, which is 26 weeks from care proceedings being initiated to disposal. And unfortunately, at the moment, what many families and children are experiencing is significant delays to that aimed timescale. So CAFCAS, who are the body that work with children and families to advise on their best interest, they publish timescales. This is probably one of the best data sets we've got on the actual court proceedings timescales. And the average timescale was 36 weeks in Q2 25-26. And it varies significantly by DFJ area. So in that same quarter, there was a maximum of 53 weeks and a minimum of 24 weeks. That's for the DFJ areas themselves. Individual local authorities, there was a greater range. But obviously, you're looking at a smaller kind of data set for each of those local authorities. What I would say, we had a few queries about this coming afterwards. I've linked on one of the end slides to the CAFCAS data sets. And it's worth going and having a look at that to understand where you sit. While LAs do report some issues reconciling these national data to their local data sets, it is consistent, of course, the way that they measure across local authorities and DFJ areas. So it's a really good pointer to understand where your local authority sits, where your DFJ area sits. So please do go and have a look at those. On to the next one. So Luke's already touched on this. But I think it's worth pointing out that one of the focuses of the Trailblazers solutions was improving pre-proceedings data. So extending that data collection to cover the whole child journey, including outcomes for children after proceedings. So one of the main thrusts of work we did as Data to Insight was we worked in phase 1 with some of those areas, some of those Trailblazers areas, to develop a data set. And again, those templates you'll be able to link out to on the last slide and have a look at them. But it's really important that we understand that our pre-proceedings data is playing a key part, has been identified as playing a key part in reducing court delays. And of course, within phase 1, we were able to develop data sets. And I think while we may have put these forward as kind of good practice, that's since been superseded by the inclusion of pre-proceedings data within the SIN census, which is what we'll be talking about today. So if we can move on to the next slide. So that was a kind of summary of what we talked about last time. We looked at the data sets that we developed in phase one. We talked about their implementation and what that meant for local authorities. But here I want to understand pre-proceedings through families first. And I think that the link might seem a little bit not tenuous, but it's not maybe an obvious link. So pre-proceedings themselves aren't a direct part of the Families First Partnership Programme. So they're not part of the reforms that have been put forward through the government. But they are really strongly linked, and they're linked in a few ways. Firstly, is the strong link to family group decision making. So family group decision making is a type of meeting that happens where families support children and caregivers to make decisions on their future progress. And FGDM is a really key part of the Families First reforms. Secondly, when we look at the Families First Partnership policy documents, we can see that one of the stated aims is actually to reduce the number of looked after children safely. And of course, pre-proceedings is a huge part of any local authorities offer to families in reducing children entering care. So when we think about family group decision making, the Families First reforms talks about offering this throughout the family help system. So it might be that you're offering family group decision making through early help or targeted early help. It might be that you're offering it at section 17 or section 47. But pre-proceedings represents the last opportunity for family group decision making to be used as an aid for to avoid a child entering care. And the SIN census data collection that's been implemented from 26 actually mainly focuses on that pre-proceedings aspect. And we have no data currently on how many children and families are going through pre-proceedings. Local authorities really have no available benchmarking to understand whether their processes are comparable. And it may seem on first glance like this is kind of one of those things where it's an isolated data point, but pre-proceedings are a really, really critical part of understanding how our whole system works. For example, once the data is published, so it'll be not next year, not this year, but next year, once that data's published, we'll be able to understand, are we comparable to neighbouring authorities on our levels of children entering pre-proceedings, or are we much lower? And is that because children are kind of entering care straight away without having been identified? Have we missed those opportunities? All these kind of things. It's a really critical part of understanding our system. And that's why I think the DfE have been so keen on entering this into the SIN census. I think it's if it hadn't been already part of kind of their plans for transformation, it would have been included as part of the Families First data requirements anyway. So in phase one, we designed data sets that were consistent across DFJ areas. And they're available to view. We felt there was an immense benefit to having that comparable data. But here we have an opportunity to do that at a national level by incorporating the SIN census data. So we could get on to the next slide, please. So this is the SIN census data requirements. And you can see that all LAs will be expected to start recording this from April 2026. And that's for inclusion on their 26-27 returns. And it covers a lot of the process side of pre-proceedings. You can see the data items. They talk about date pre-proceedings began, when you've sent your letter before proceedings, when the initial pre-proceedings meeting was, review meetings, decision to step up or down, outcomes of pre-proceedings, applications, and letter of issue. So it really focuses on that process. I'll talk sort of slightly separately about family group decision making. I think what's really interesting here is to make this work, you really need to formalize case tracking and align it with your existing case management system. And my reflection would be that's actually a pretty significant piece of work, and in all likelihood kind of carries its own transformation requirements. One of the things that we've learned from speaking to local authorities over the past months or however long we've been working on this project is that often pre-proceedings data is not currently held within the existing case management systems. It's managed on trackers, on spreadsheets. It kind of sits awkwardly between social care and legal, and it can be a real challenge actually for local authorities to get that data out and make it usable. Although it is happening in our group's last at the last session, we did learn from some authorities that actually that's already forming part of their quarterly reporting. And I think there's an acknowledgement in the SIN census guidance that this is perhaps a more significant ask than their usual adding of data items. You've got the option to put in, we don't record this yet for many of these answers. And I think we've been moving this way. Of course, Ofsted have been asking for children in pre-proceedings, but I think what I see this as is moving gears from something that we can manage locally on a spreadsheet to now that this is a core part of our workflow. This needs to be integrated into our case management systems. And I think that's another reason why this is really inseparable from the wider Families First partnership work. It's really unlikely that you're going to be doing this large-scale transformation work around Families First here and kind of not think about this as a related item, particularly when you've got family group decision making. And the family group decision making measures are really interesting to me and potentially challenging. So the measure about the offer of family group decision making is that the FGDM is to be offered in the letter before proceedings. So this is a direct point at which there should be an offer on that letter that says, we're offering you the opportunity to partake in FGDM. And it's a little bit difficult when we think about Families First, where family group decision making sits across this kind of whole spectrum of work that we're doing, right through targeted early help to Section 17 and so on. But the guidance in the family help policy is that where there's a significant change in need, family group decision making should be offered again. And I think this makes sense for pre-proceedings. We kind of think of it as its own discrete model, its own discrete little workflow. And of course, entering pre-proceedings does represent a significant change in need. But I think where it might be a little bit messy and difficult for some local authorities is where they've embraced family group decision making more as a kind of practice model. So if if their regular kind of review meetings are actually moved more to a family-based review, some of that reporting around that might be quite tricky, and that's something that we've seen with the pathfinders. And we can also see that there are gaps in this data set, and I think that's completely understandable at the moment, but there are gaps nonetheless. We're entirely focused on pre-proceedings, and the recommendation from DFJ Trailblazers was that local authorities should have oversight of the full process. So past that point at which a decision is made to go to court, right through to, well, what are the timescales? What's the eventual outcome? And we'll look at some of those gaps in the next slide. Okay, so some of the gaps that I think we've got that local authorities might want to think about when they're thinking about setting up this data. What other pre-proceedings interventions are happening? So obviously family group decision making is really prominent in Families First policy, and it's clear that the guidance doesn't intend family group decision making to be the only intervention that could support families through pre-proceedings. I wonder if there's value in us thinking about recording the other kind of work that we do so that we can evidence their contribution to diverting from care. I think the problem is that when we mandate data around one type of intervention, it can flatten practice, and that becomes our pre-proceedings offer. So I think it's really important that we're able to evidence the diverse offers that we do give to families and children in avoiding entering care. And then court proceedings data, so data around timescales. So really, we want to have our own internal view of where children are in the court proceedings, where delays are occurring, where children are coming up to the 26 weeks, but there's inaction. I think it's really important to have oversight of that and not just kind of stop our data collection at we've now issued proceedings. That's now a black box where we just wait till the end and some data comes out, or we'll look at CAFCAS timescales. I think it's incumbent on local authorities to be more proactive to that, even though it's not part of the SIN census. I think I'd really be looking at incorporating that data throughout our understanding of this system. Assessments data. So in phase one, in the areas that we worked with, repeat assessments were often cited as a cause of delay in care proceedings. And this often accompanied things like court availability. So, for example, if an LA had felt that court availability had contributed to delays and then reassessment were needed because it was out of date, assessments data was a really key piece of information that we collated and used as a way to have discussions throughout the LFJBs. And then finally, the outcomes of proceedings. I'm really interested in this. I was really interested in this in phase one. I think there's a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to see the full flow of family help through child protection, pre-proceedings and care proceedings. I kind of almost see it, like understanding the efficacy of our services right the way through. And of course, pre-proceedings won't be right for every child and they won't be offered to every child, but it's really, it's a really exciting opportunity where we'll have visibility over the full, over our full system, perhaps for the first time. And I think understanding those outcomes for children who've had slightly different journeys will be really interesting. And I think the DfE is interested in this as well, as they think about things like their kinship projects that they've got currently going on across the country. A focus on special guardianship orders, all these sorts of things. I think understanding these complexities is going to be a really interesting area for us going forward as local authorities. So I think that's everything. So I will just run through the next slide quickly, if that's okay. So I just wanted to put some helpful links up here before we go into the discussion areas. And Luke's got a couple of slides too, but I'm not sure if you're going to look at those now. But I've just put some links here to things that I think are really interesting. So the first one is the National Audit Office report on improving family court services. So one of the things that's kind of happened is the NAO have done a report looking at delays in care proceedings and outlining the reasons. And of course, data is a strand of that. I think it's really interesting reading. If you're interested in looking at that wider system and how that all fits together, that's really interesting. The SIN Census Guide to Submitting Data. Of course, we're all working to this anyway. That third and fourth links, though, are the ones I'm really interested in just sharing. I know Luke's going to share some links later, but the wealth of materials that MV are offering is really impressive, and I think it's worth having a look at some of the stuff, the templates on there and the learning on there. And if I were to highlight any particular part, it's that Journey Through Proceedings mini-series podcast, which I listened to, I think this week or perhaps last week. And I was really fascinated for me. I think that's a really well produced, really interesting series that I would say any kind of data person should go and listen to, really just to humanize the process. There's people who've been through care proceedings and it's talking to them about their experiences. Absolutely fascinating. And then lastly is the CAFCAS data. So I talked about this earlier. That's the quarterly data on public law where all of your weekly, all of your targets are, how your local authority is performing and all that kind of thing. So over to you, Luke. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, that's great. Thank you, John. So John mentions there's a couple of bits that I'm going to share, but I'll do that when we kind of wrap up at the end. It's just kind of links to building on what John's got on the slide here of other things to kind of take a look at that we have that are available, as well as our upcoming webinar series, where there'll be kind of a lot more being talked about in this space that hopefully will be relevant to those of you on the call now. But next we have time for breakout rooms and for a bit of discussion. So as John mentioned earlier, the kind of real focus of the discussion today is about kind of coming together as a group to discuss how prepared we are for the SIN census changes and everything that John's been talking about so far. So we'll have three groups. I'll open the rooms now. Those of you in room 3, I'll be coming in to facilitate the discussion with you. So just bear with me a second because it'll take me a little bit longer. But John and my colleague Jamera will be facilitating the other two, and we should be going through now. There's normally an awkward moment as it loads. Hello, welcome back everyone. I think we're all back now, which is great. Great. Cool. So we've had 3 groups. We had lots of discussion, certainly in my group. And then, but I don't know whether we want to take a couple of minutes to sort of feedback and sort of share a little bit about what we talked about for the benefit of the wider group. I don't know who was group 1. Was that Jamira or you, or was that John? I don't know if one of you is able to kind of give a bit of an update. Okay, well, so take it in turns then either way.
I'll quickly go. Yeah, we had a really interesting discussion. I think it's definitely a work in progress. I think is what's fair to say, that we kind of seem to be between 2 workflows at the moment, with still a reliance on spreadsheets, still a reliance on data being input kind of into informal structures, but with a solid plan to move towards our case management systems. Even though there's some concerns that, because it's not directly part of the family's first reforms, that that there's a potential for this to kind of get put onto the back burner a little bit, even though obviously we've got the pressure of the sin census returns. So it's definitely a work in progress, and definitely something to keep an eye on. But hopefully from the sounds of it, we will be getting some data throughout 26, 27 returns and be able to look at that in October next year.
Is that similar for your group, Jamira?
Yeah, similar. So we had a good discussion covering kind of various piloting approaches, sense that people are in early stages, but there's a sense of optimism, kind of similar to what John said about continuing reliance on spreadsheets in some places, and concerns about capacity with FFP and other concurrent reforms. But yeah, similar messaging.
Yeah, we were similar in my group as well. I think there was kind of a point that some of these data points, some areas, some local authorities are kind of already tracking, but have been tracking it in a certain way, which perhaps may be slightly different to now the new requirements. So there's a change that will be required there. And then as again, which was kind of a similar theme that we had at the session a couple of weeks ago, but talking about the challenge of how is this going to happen, which I think both of you mentioned as well, that it's not as so a bit more thought perhaps being needed about what's the kind of best resource, who's going to be responsible for entering this data and tracking the data and inputting it as well. So that was those were a couple of the additional points I want to make. I don't know, open it up to the wider group while we've got a couple of minutes left, if there was anything else that the 3 of us kind of missed that kind of really struck you as part of the conversation. Otherwise, I will bring back up my slides and we can kind of look a little bit more around kind of what's coming up next. So once again, thanks everyone for attending today, and for those of you who also attended the session a couple of weeks ago. Again, here are the kind of helpful links that John referenced, which will really help kind of build out the kind of what's been discussed today, whether that's kind of from the presentation John gave or from the discussions that we had in smaller groups. So do take a look at those. We will be sharing these slides more widely after this session as well today. So you will have this, and don't feel like you necessarily need to click on all the links right now, but you will have those. So they're really helpful. So do take a look at that. John also mentioned that there's just a lot of content that's come out over the last couple of years, from the kind of the phase 1 and then the phase 2, the kind of Trailblazer program. So again, do take a look at these. They're all sat on the Mutual Ventures website. There's a lot on there, whether that's the kind of case stories that kind of John referenced before, which kind of does a great job at humanizing the experience of care proceedings and kind of bring the data to life in that regard. There's blog posts, webinar recordings. There's we've got a good practice guide as well, which is kind of really useful. You might want to take a look at that, about what different areas are trying and doing that kind of are really making a difference in this space. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight that we've got an upcoming webinar series. So this is the first 4 webinars that we've got planned for later this month. So 17th of March, the 18th, 23rd and 24th as well. which are looking at kind of different aspects. So not so much on a specific kind of data level now, but kind of looking at different parts, whether that's involving the voice of women and children into care proceedings, or looking at making system change happen. So we've got several big topics with great speakers lined up coming up. There'll be more planned than the 4 as well. We've got a couple more yet to be announced, which we will be doing so. So do take a look at those. Do sign up to them if you're free and available and interested. Again, these will be on the slide, so I'll make sure I'll share these as well. But once again, thank you everyone for attending and taking part today. Do reach out if you've got any questions, or if there be anything else that you'd kind of like to hear about, or also like a bit of help with. John and I will be available. You should have our emails based on the invite list, the invite that was given to you. So, but yeah, once again, thank you all, and look forward to seeing you all or hearing from you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.